Bueno, estimados asistentes, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Hugo Vázquez, Student Chapter Liaison de la SPE Ecuador Section. Sean bienvenidos al lanzamiento de la nueva versión del e-Challenge, un programa de los capítulos estudiantiles de la SPE. Este programa busca la vinculación directa de estudiantes y jóvenes profesionales, miembros del SPE, con la industria. En la primera edición obtuvimos excelentes resultados presentados por los estudiantes participantes de las diferentes universidades del país. Y en esta edición de Machine Learning buscamos desarrollar el potencial de los participantes con un reto de programación y predicción, utilizando data real de un campo. Nuestra sección, siguiendo la visión y misión de la SPE Internacional de fomentar y compartir conocimiento técnico a través de eventos de alto estándar, ha preparado para ustedes un ciclo de conferencias magistrales enfocadas a los propósitos de esta edición. Quiero agradecer a nuestros expositores invitados que han aceptado formar parte de este proyecto, así como a nuestro sponsor oficial, Schlumberger, por apoyar las iniciativas de los capítulos estudiantiles. Sin más, quiero dar paso a Félix Gallo, quien será el moderador durante estos 3 días y también es la persona que ha impulsado el desarrollo de este proyecto. Bienvenido, Félix.
Muchas gracias, Hugo, por la introducción. Estimados asistentes, es para mí un honor presentarles el primer ciclo de conferencias de Machine Learning organizadas por la SPE, las cuales contarán con la intervención de ponentes de muy alto nivel. Estas charlas tienen como objetivo dar apertura al lanzamiento del primer reto de Machine Learning organizado por nuestra sección, el cual tratará sobre mantenimiento predictivo, como ya lo dijo Hugo, sobre bombas de electrosumergibles y del cual les brindaremos más información el día viernes al finalizar las conferencias. Sin extenderme más, quiero dar la bienvenida a nuestro primer ponente, quien es un profesional de muy larga trayectoria. Su nombre es Alexis Canizares. Tiene un Bachelor en Computer Science de la Universidad Commonwealth de Reino Unido, un MBA de la Universidad Napier en Escocia y cuenta con una certificación de liderazgo en transformación digital de la Universidad de Berkeley. Se ha desempeñado en puestos gerenciales en diferentes países como España, Holanda, Estados Unidos, Noruega y Reino Unido. Actualmente se desempeña como líder en productos de ciencia de datos en Equinor. Es ecuatoriano, nacido en Ambato, y el día de hoy nos va a compartir el tema detección de anomalías en escala usando Machine Learning. Alexis, bienvenido. Por favor, puedes continuar.
Hola a todos. Muy contento de estar aquí hablando, compartir con ustedes un proyecto muy importante para mí también. Y más que todo, de tener la oportunidad de hablar con gente de mi país de origen. Voy a compartir unos documentos y voy a compartir los detalles de un proyecto. En el tiempo que tenemos no vamos a poder cubrir mucho, pero me voy a enfocar a las partes principales del proyecto, las partes que hacen la diferencia. He preparado una pequeña agenda, la voy a compartir ahora con ustedes. Por favor, me confirmas, Félix, si la ven.
Confirmado.
Sí, Alexis.
Muy bien. Pues vamos a hablar de un proyecto que se llama Omnia Prevent y es una iniciativa creada por Equinor hace alrededor de 3 años para evitar mayores pérdidas de producción. Esencialmente. Antes de explicar los detalles del proyecto, voy a hablar un poco del contexto, de dónde se sitúa este proyecto. Equinor, si habéis podido ver la página web o en LinkedIn, la compañía es muy grande, es la compañía de petróleos de Noruega, reconvertida en una compañía de energía, ahora invirtiendo mucho en otras opciones de energía como el hidrógeno, el viento y otros. Equinor tiene alrededor de 30-35 assets. Cuando me refiero a un asset, que aquí es un sitio, es una localización geográfica. Por ejemplo, un grupo de plataformas en unas coordenadas específicas en el Mar del Norte, que es donde es la mayor producción de petróleo. Pero también hay assets, hay grupos en todo el mundo, en otros países, en Estados Unidos, en onshore, pero la mayor parte es en la continente, en el Mar del Norte. Entonces, si pensamos en la cantidad de máquinas y systems que estas plataformas tienen, son muchísimas. Actualmente instalamos sensores en todas las máquinas que podemos. Hay sensores de todo tipo, sensores de sonido, sensores de temperatura, vibración. Instalamos sensores diariamente en miles de máquinas. Los sensores, pensamos que, por ejemplo, un sitio en el Mar del Norte tiene un sistema y tiene unos subsistemas y dentro tiene subsistemas o sistemas. Si podemos imaginarnos a esta estructura como un árbol genealógico. En la ruta, en la raíz está el asset y luego hay una serie de sistemas. En estos sistemas es, por ejemplo, el sistema de pumps, de bombas, hidráulicas o eléctricas, o el sistema de inyección de agua, por ejemplo. Entonces, todos estos sistemas están estructurados en subsystems, y estos subsystems en máquinas, y estas máquinas contienen sensores. Esta es la estructura de datos con la que trabajamos nosotros. Para que podáis entender más o menos el contexto, son cerca de 200,000 sensores al día de hoy. De estos sensores que monitorizamos, o sea, que recibimos datos en una data lake en Azure, en Microsoft Azure, se guardan continuamente. O sea, hay sensores que me envían datos cada segundo, sensores que envían datos cada minuto, etc. Y estos son time series, ¿no? Son time series data que guardamos continuamente. So, 200,000. En adición a esto, creamos nuestras propias series de datos que pueden ser calculadas o pueden ser el resultado de Machine Learning. Esto es para que pueda ver más o menos el tamaño, o sea, la cantidad de datos que tenemos que manejar de una forma u otra, ¿no? Como lo acabo de mencionar, tenemos una base de datos, un data lake, que continuamente recibe los datos, y tenemos un proceso que copia los datos recibidos en una base de datos de time series de datos, que se llama influx. Estamos continuamente buscando mejorar estos sistemas, pero por ahora funcionan bien y hemos obtenido resultados. Tres de los mayores, de las principales, digamos, razones para este proyecto, sobre el problem statement. Primero, como ya lo mencioné, es reducir las pérdidas de producción. Y si os imagináis la cantidad de dinero que puede producir una pérdida por un día de falta de producción en una de las plataformas, es muchísimo, muchísimo dinero. De aquí la importancia de utilizar Machine Learning, y también les voy a contar algunas de las historias que tenemos ya desde el año pasado, que hemos evitado mayores pérdidas de producción, evitando paradas no requeridas. ¿Qué es lo que necesita la solución para funcionar? Volviendo al contexto, es la cantidad de datos. Necesitamos tener una escala muy, muy grande. Tenemos ahora mismo más de 10.000 modelos de machine learning siendo ejecutados. Son 10.000. Claro que cada modelo tiene un número distinto de sensores, más o menos, pero esa es la escala de la que estamos hablando. Y sin poder utilizar algo como Azure Kubernetes sería imposible. Pero también el computing, necesitamos mucha computación para obtener esto. Entonces, dos de los factores de éxito que yo he escogido para compartir con ustedes es uno, la escalabilidad. Cómo podemos ir de un modelo a 1.000 modelos y cómo podemos automatizar ese proceso de creación de modelos. Ustedes ya son familiares con la ciencia de datos, con data science. Ahí yo no voy a explicar hoy lo que es deep learning o lo que es machine learning. Eso ya lo sabéis. Pero lo que yo quiero explicar es cómo se puede implementar machine learning a esta escala. Y para nosotros, para el proyecto, son estas dos. Es cómo hacer todo lo que hacemos en los miles y desplegarlos con éxito en largas cantidades. Voy a presentar algunos de estos diagramas, están en inglés, pero yo creo que se pueden entender. Si pensamos un poco, si pensamos en lo que es un proceso de creación de un modelo de machine learning, ¿no? O sea, tenemos que entender lo que estamos manejando. Pues, digamos, tenemos una bomba de agua con un motor. Entonces, tenemos que saber qué sensores están ahí. Entonces, tenemos sensores de temperatura, sensores de vibración, tenemos una medida de la velocidad, por ejemplo, del RPM, y otros sensores, ¿no? Humedad. Tenemos que entender cuál es el problema que intentamos resolver. Luego tenemos que mirar a los datos, como he mencionado antes, la cantidad de datos. Digamos que esta máquina tiene 12 sensores. Tenemos que mirarlos, tenemos que preparar los datos. Hay muchas veces que datos no vienen completos o vienen en distintas escalas. Y luego tenemos que crear un modelo. Creamos un modelo, escogemos una arquitectura de Machine Learning, que puede ser un autoencoder, o LSTM, o simplemente una regresión logística o lo que sea. Escogemos un modelo, lo evaluamos, lo verificamos con los datos de prueba y lo desplegamos, ¿no? Deployment. ¿Cómo hacemos esto? Si pensamos en el tiempo que se tarda en este proceso. Nosotros hemos calculado que trabajando juntos con un experto, se puede conseguir modelos bastante buenos de rendimiento bastante alto entre 3 o 4 semanas. Si pensamos en la cantidad de modelos que tenemos que desplegar, no nos alcanza el tiempo, tendríamos que contratar muchísima gente para hacer esto. Entonces, ¿dónde está la clave? Pues lo que hacemos es observar o entender nuestro proyecto como un problema de Machine Learning, el mismo, ¿no? Tenemos que eliminar los procesos, los pasos manuales, no solo de los ingenieros, sino también de los data scientists, de las personas que están creando los modelos. Entonces, tenemos un proceso de maduración de la automatización. Entonces, para diseñar un modelo de Machine Learning, ¿qué es lo que hacemos? Miramos a los sensores, específicamente para time series, para datos en series, porque esto es donde estamos. Miramos a los sensores, escogemos los que tienen la mayor correlación, por ejemplo, y luego le aplicamos una arquitectura. Esta arquitectura va a ser una u otra. Voy a volver a hablar de esto un poco más específico en un momento, pero solo para intentar entender esta automatización. Definimos el proceso del data science, el proceso de data science, y lo intentamos automatizar. Por ejemplo, uno de los pasos del proceso es escoger un periodo de tiempo de entrenamiento para el modelo que dé mayor rendimiento. Y esto lleva su tiempo. Y es uno de los mayores retos que tenemos ahora mismo. Pero ese es un paso aquí, ¿no? Es un paso que es manual. Alguien tiene que ir, un ingeniero tiene que trabajar con un experto para definir el periodo de tiempo de los datos que se va a utilizar para entrenar el modelo. Cuando hace esto, define una fecha de inicio y una fecha de final. Funciona, se entrena, si funciona, se deploya. ¿Cómo automatizamos este paso? Ese es uno de los retos que tenemos. La mayor razón es que no tenemos, que en inglés es label data, no tenemos, no sabemos el estado de cada sensor en todo el tiempo. Podemos tener algo de historia, pero no sabemos todo. Entonces tenemos que utilizar métodos que no son supervisados. Y de aquí viene el nombre de detección de anomalías. No predecimos el tipo de fallo de la máquina. Lo que hacemos es predecir con bastante tiempo de anticipado si algo no es normal comparado con el tiempo que usamos para entrenar el modelo. Y eso es importante entender porque no usamos un clasificador de fallos. Es simplemente, bueno, no simplemente, pero es un detector de anomalías. Y depende completamente en los periodos que se usan para entrenamiento. Entonces, voy a volver a la agenda. Así nos enfocamos en trabajar con Deep Learning a escala. Quería compartir con ustedes también unas líneas de código para que se pueda tener una idea de lo que utilizamos. Les invito a todos también a mirar estos repositorios en GitHub. Gordo Test Project en Gordo, yo puedo compartir esto. Estos son open source código. Una de las estrategias de Equinor es abrir el código. Tenemos mucho código en el proyecto que lo compartiremos con todos ustedes. Pero miremos, este es un ejemplo de un configurador. Antes de ir aquí voy a pausar un momento, hablar un poquito de la arquitectura base del sistema. Y esta... un momento. Ok, espero que se pueda ver. No hace falta leer todo, pero para que puedan tener una idea de la infraestructura de base para la escalabilidad, ¿no? Es Kubernetes. Bueno, a estas alturas debería ya ustedes ser familiares con contenedores y Kubernetes y con Continuous Deployment, etcétera. Pues usamos Kubernetes, son clusters lo que utilizamos. Encima de Kubernetes está Kubeflow para gestionar el end-to-end, el Machine Learning. Y si no han tenido oportunidad, pues lo pueden mirar, simplemente buscar Kubeflow en Kubernetes. Adoptamos tecnologías muy rápido para Continuous Delivery, Continuous Deployment, Argo y Terraform para utilizar una forma declarativa para desplegar la infraestructura. De esta manera, utilizando, todo esto es automatizado en Azure, y esto nos permite desplegar, por ejemplo, podemos desplegar en un clúster hasta 6,000 modelos de Machine Learning. Claro que dependen en los tiempos de periodo que tienen los modelos, pero en resumen o en average. Me olvidó la palabra. Un poco de código, ¿no? Sí, como dije, voy a compartir esto con ustedes, pero aquí pueden ver, primero, utilizamos Kubernetes, ¿no? Esto debe ser familiar con ustedes. Este es un YAML file. Y voy a mostrar. Esto es lo que ustedes ven ahora en la pantalla. Es un modelo. Esto es una definición de un modelo. Y lo que hacemos en Kubernetes simplemente es aplicar este archivo en un clúster. Y no solo aplicarlo una vez, pero si hay una actualización a cualquiera de estos archivos automáticamente, el clúster lo recoge y lo hace. Entonces, ¿qué tenemos aquí? 4 sensores. Esta máquina, no sé exactamente la que es, un ejemplo. Pero es un sitio, es Troll A Platform. Y estos son los nombres de los 4 sensores. Utiliza estos 4 sensores para entrenar el modelo y produce reconstrucciones. Y me refiero a reconstrucciones porque es básicamente un reconstructor, no es un predecidor. Se reconstruyen valores para estos 3. Y lo que me refería antes de las fechas del periodo de entrenamiento del modelo, para estas fechas es todos los datos. Agregamos todos los datos a 10 minutos por la cantidad y también por la visualización. Filtramos o retiramos datos que no se adhieren a nuestro criterio. Para eso utilizamos unos filtros. Se puede añadir cualquier tipo de metadata, información relacionada a la máquina, a la bomba, a lo que sea. Y se puede escoger la evaluación, tipo de evaluación, y lo que podrán reconocer aquí abajo son una típica pipeline. So Gordo system, which is the system that builds models, trains models, and hosts them, supports all the libraries that are. Me cambié a inglés, lo siento. Soporta todas las librerías de Google, por ejemplo. Aquí hay otros ejemplos. Como digo, este archivo, este repositorio está disponible para que ustedes lo puedan ver. Pero aquí hay ejemplos de todos los tipos de arquitecturas que nuestro sistema puede soportar. So, en resumen, es una lista de sensores, un periodo y el método. Aquí, por ejemplo, es un LSTM forecast. Esto facilita muchísimo la automatización porque los data scientists de ellos no se ponen a definir esto. Estos modelos ya están definidos y lo único que tenemos que hacer es llamarlos como una librería. Es decir, para estos sensor o para este tipo de maquinaria utilizamos esto. Y lo que hemos aprendido en casi 2 años de experimentación es que los autoencoders con un nivel de reconstrucción nos dan un rendimiento bastante alto. Es como el 20-80. O sea, 20% de las arquitecturas de los modelos que tenemos tienen un alto rendimiento en 80% de las máquinas. Nunca vamos a conseguir el 100%, pero si extrapolamos el valor que nos da un autoencoder y lo aplicamos al 80% de las maquinarias, obtenemos un rendimiento muy, muy alto. Les aconsejo que miren más en detalle los autoencoders. Como dije, no voy a ir a explicar lo que es Deep Learning o qué es lo que es autoencoder, pero simplemente es una reconstrucción, una reconstrucción del input con el output. ¿Cómo se utiliza esto en la vida real? Bueno, voy a volver a esto en un momento. El tiempo. Si voy muy rápido, por favor, Félix, me das una señal o repetir algo. Los mayores retos para lograr una total automatización del sistema caen en estas dos áreas. Hay otros retos, pero estos son los que darían el 80% del valor. Y he mencionado el periodo de entrenamiento. ¿Cómo podemos escoger un periodo de entrenamiento sin saber mucho acerca de los sensores? Para esto hemos construido unos sistemas que leen, un sistema de calidad, de control de calidad de los datos, que lee cada serie y nos da un valor de calidad. Es básicamente si se puede usar o no. Si, por ejemplo, ese sensor no tiene suficientes datos para, en ciertos periodos, no se puede utilizar. O la correlación también. Pero esto más es en el segundo tema. Hace un momento hablé acerca de este paso en el proceso donde un científico y un experto, diseñan un modelo. La calidad del modelo depende de la calidad de la data y la correlación entre los sensores. Cuando vengan ustedes a hacer predictive maintenance, ese es el factor de éxito, ¿no? La calidad de este grupo de sensores, cómo agruparlos en un modelo. O sea, cómo escoger estos 4 sensores para que me den el mayor rendimiento. Como dije antes, se puede hacer y se tiene todo el tiempo del mundo, pero no se tiene todo el tiempo del mundo, entonces se tiene que buscar maneras de hacerlo automáticamente. Y si ustedes ya tienen experiencia o han tenido experiencia con clustering, por ejemplo, esas son una de las métodos o técnicas que utilizamos para buscar cómo agrupar estos sensores sin tener que intervenir manualmente. Si se consigue, esto no se puede hacer, no se puede conseguir, como digo, 100%, pero si se consigue un alto rendimiento es muy bueno. Me gustaría mostrar el sistema, los módulos de nuestro sistema. Cada caja aquí, hexágono, ¿no? Se refiere a una área de acción o sistema o módulo dentro de nuestra plataforma. En el centro está Kubernetes, Kubeflow, Azure, la computación que necesitamos, que nos permite escalar en cualquier dirección. Y alrededor de esta escalabilidad tenemos nuestros servicios. Tenemos un servicio que entrena y produce las reconstrucciones. Y todos estos sistemas están conectados a través de interfaces, APIs, y pueden utilizarse con otras plataformas, ¿no? Si prefieres desplegar uno de estos modelos en Amazon, es posible. Y esperamos poder distribuir todos estos en open source pronto. Siempre integración con otros sistemas dentro de la compañía. No nos gusta tener duplicación de datos o de procesos. Entonces, lo que hacemos es integrar, ¿no? Integramos con los sistemas que existen. Por ejemplo, y muy relacionado con predictive maintenance. Cuando la forma tradicional de monitorizar si una máquina está bien o va mal bueno, depende del constructor de la máquina, pero lo que se hace es simplemente monitorizar el sensor, unos sensores, ¿right? Entonces, un sensor de temperatura, por ejemplo, si la máquina está corriendo hasta 300, 600 RPM, digamos, si la temperatura pasa más de 50 grados, puede haber un problema. Entonces, lo que se hace es monitorizar cada sensor, los individuos sensores. Cuando utilizamos Machine Learning, utilizamos el autoencoder, lo que hacemos es utilizar todos los sensores como uno y cada uno basado en la relación de los otros, ¿no? Entonces, así es como construimos un autoencoder. De esta manera, lo que hacemos es permitir que el sistema encuentre anomalías pronto al nivel de sistema, no al nivel de sensor. Pues agregamos las anomalías de cada sensor y construimos un nivel de validación automático que cuando esta agregación de las anomalías individuales rebasa, nos da una alarma. Y esta salida o esta información la enviamos a un sistema que existe actualmente, donde los ingenieros pueden tomar una acción o, o decidir qué hacer en ese momento. Si llaman al sitio para pedir una evaluación o se para la máquina, lo que sea. Estoy mirando el tiempo. Y estos dos temas están relacionados y quiero mostrarles un ejemplo. Por ejemplo, aquí tenemos una visualización de un evento. Aquí lo que ha hecho el autoencoder es crear esta anomalía total para esta bomba, creo que es bomba A, y ha reproducido la anomalía. Y cuando pasa el nivel de 1, siguiendo una lógica, crea un evento. Y este evento es lo que se muestra a un usuario para tomar una acción. Aquí, por ejemplo, lo que haya sido, se revisa cuáles son los sensores que están involucrados en esto, la contribución al error total de cada sensor, y así se sabe por ejemplo, cuál es el sensor o sensores que son los que están causando la mayor parte de la anomalía. Okay. Esto es lo que os acabo de mostrar, el módulo o el servicio de visualización integrado con nuestro sistema. Y uno de los más importantes es la calidad. Cómo no solo podemos crear miles de modelos, pero también cómo los podemos mejorar automáticamente. O no automáticamente, o manualmente, pero cómo se puede mejorar. Actualmente lo que hacemos es medir la matriz de confusión, ¿no? Medir true positive, false positive, etc. Vemos qué tal cada modelo. Y lo que hacemos es comparar con la historia, porque hay cierta historia, aunque no está contenida en bases de datos que están curadas, hay cierta historia. Lo que podemos hacer ahora es comparar con incidentes que han pasado realmente y ver si nuestros modelos funcionan en estos. Y estas son las historias, las historias positivas que tenemos en los últimos 2 años, en el último año, de que hemos podido no solo reproducir esos incidentes, sino que hemos encontrado y evitado mayores incidentes, especialmente en el asset Johannes Sverdrup, que es uno de los más nuevos de Equinor. Yo creo que voy a parar aquí, Félix, por cuestiones y por el tiempo.
Sí, perfecto, Alexis. Muchas gracias por tu presentación. Tengo unas preguntas en el chat que te las voy a hacer llegar.
Uh-huh.
A ver, Ángeles Remache pregunta, excelente presentación. Mi pregunta es la siguiente. ¿Cuál es el mejor método de imputación para valores nulos cuando desarrollamos modelos de clustering con series de tiempo?
En lo que construimos depende de cuánto tiempo te refieres. Nosotros rellenamos, o no sé si el mejor término para usar, rellenamos hasta un periodo pequeño, pero si el periodo de datos de nulos es muy largo, eliminamos el sensor completamente. Depende del tipo de sensor y depende del tiempo, digo, pero en gordo, en el sistema que lo presenté, es configurable, eso se puede configurar, y me parece que lo tenemos configurado a 3 semanas de tiempo para nuestros datos que vienen en cada 10 minutos.
Ok, perfecto. Tengo otra de Hugo Vázquez que comenta, ¿es posible, buenas tardes, excelente presentación, ¿es posible aplicar Docker en lugar de Kubernetes?
Utilizamos Docker. O sea, las imágenes para nuestra aplicación están en Docker y Kubernetes simplemente las usa. O sea, las imágenes están en un registry, un registro de Azure, y las Kubernetes las coge de ahí. O sea, la mayor parte del desarrollo, si es de un científico o de los desarrolladores, utilizan Docker.
Ok. Y una última pregunta nuevamente de Ángeles, que me llegó igual al chat, es ¿qué alternativas tenemos para series de tiempo que no son univariantes? Aquí está. A ver, perdón, es de Orlando Ocaña. ¿Qué método se ajustaría mejor a una data histórica que no es univariante, ya que un LSTM es bastante precisa para series de tiempo cíclicas, pero qué alternativas tenemos para su contraparte?
Para el STM tendría que guardarme esa pregunta. El problema que tenemos nosotros es que no hemos podido encontrar una manera efectiva de incluir la variable de tiempo en un LSTM. Es uno de los retos que tenemos y me gustaría mantener la pregunta y volver para contestar. Tenemos algunos ejemplos y para todos me gustaría continuar la conversación con todos ustedes y claro, ver si podemos colaborar.
Claro que sí. Alexis, bueno, quiero darte las gracias por parte del SPE y pues de parte de nuestros invitados. Quería comentarte que esta es la primera vez que nosotros tenemos una presentación acerca de lo que es series de tiempo y Machine Learning, Deep Learning respecto a detección de anomalías. Entonces, ha sido un gusto tenerte con nosotros acá. Y bueno, también si nos podrías ayudar con el link del repositorio de GitHub para nosotros enviarles a los asistentes, también sería de gran ayuda. Sin más, quiero darte las gracias de parte de la SPE Ecuador Section. Ha sido un gusto tenerte acá y pues esperamos poder contar contigo en siguientes eventos que vamos a desarrollar en los meses que vienen. Un gran saludo desde Ecuador y pues que estés muy bien, Alexis.
Muy bien, un gusto. Hasta luego a
Claro.
todos.
Estimados asistentes, vamos a tomar un pequeño receso de 5 minutos y ya volvemos con ustedes con la siguiente presentación de Peter Borman, la cual va a ser dictada en inglés. Entonces, por favor, los esperamos acá en 5 minutos de receso. Gracias. Good afternoon, dear attendees. For our next presentation, I'm delighted to introduce you to Peter Borman, who is a geologist who works in exploration at ConocoPhillips, Norway. His interests are regional geology, prospect assessment, and improving geoscience workflows by the use of machine learning. Peter has a master's degree in basic analysis from Royal Holloway University in London and a geology bachelor's degree from the University of Tübingen in Germany. Peter is going to talk about the results of the fourth machine learning contest, which is a quite interesting initiative from Norway. And Peter, please, the audience is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I just share my slides here. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I'm going to start with the most often asked question of 2020. Can you see my slides?
Yes, Peter.
Okay, fair enough. So yeah, just a couple of rules here. If you have a burning question, feel free to ask it when you can stop me in the presentation. I have shared the presentation, so you can have the presentation afterwards, and let's have a good discussion about this. So the title here is Winning with Open Subsurface Datasets and the result from the fourth 2020 machine learning competition with wells and seismic. We got quite a few sponsors, you see them all here, that helped us doing this. But maybe, you know, first we go, so why did we do this? Why organize a competition on machine learning and who's FORCE? So FORCE is a Norwegian association of petroleum producing oil and gas companies. And it's sort of a superior organization that tries to improve exploration processes and making exploration and production more efficient by working together. And so it's a really nice forum. We have lots of knowledge sharing along many topics, and one of the topics here is machine learning. So it's a sort of very nice setup. So why did we do this? You may have heard that Hall in 2000, Matt Hall and his friend Brandon Hall in 2016, they organized an SEG competition on well logs. And that was really the inception of machine learning in geoscience, we can say. It was the first time that modern machine learning tools like random forests, boosted trees have been used on well logs to predict lithology. At the time, there were 40 teams that signed up. They had 8 wells, 2 of them were test wells. And in only 4 or 5 years, there's 40 citations of this data set in Google Scholar. And it turned out the data set is not entirely public, so there's a big problem there. And but what it really goes to show, first of all, like this was the explosion, or the sort of the Cambrian explosion, you could say, of machine learning in geoscience, and it really showed the need that we need to put more data sets out in public for all these clever people around the world to experiment with oil and gas data, and not just with Google and Facebook and medicine data that there's an awful lot of. Sorry, why did that pop up here? Okay. So who were we? So what was our goal? So we got together through this FORCE organization, a couple of people here. So we had Surendra Manral from Schlumberger, Peter Auerson from Aker BP, Fahad Dilip from Equinor, and Peter Dishington from the local oil and gas authority. So we call this the NPD. It's the sort of state oil and gas authority. And then there's me here, Peter Borman. And before we did that, we really said, like, we set a couple of ground rules that we really felt was very important. We want to have a competition on the well log data and on the seismic data. We wanted to see how good people are in finding faults on seismic these days. And we wanted to have a global, online, virtual, and free of charge event. So, you know, global, yes, these days, you don't know where the cleverest person in the world is currently sitting. This can be in Ecuador, it can be in Southeast China. That's why it has to be global. Online, because also COVID happened, and it was luckily a lot more people were able to work on Teams. And free of charge, of course, to really have the barriers low. The data needed to be completely open source, and the codes for the well log had to be published afterwards. So we didn't want to only create proprietary knowledge. And we wanted to provide a legacy database of logs and interpretation that can be used for the coming years from students, from everybody in the world, to see if they, experiment, learn something, do something. We could have gone to Kaggle and say, like, here's $1 million, solve our problem. We are the oil industry, we have money, but we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to have, like, a lot of AI sweatshops, shall we call, working with our data. We wanted to focus on geoscience, domain knowledge holders. So we put very little prize money there, and we wanted to connect the people across it. So so how did we do it? So seismic data set is relatively easy these days because Australia has this really fantastically open seismic database that you can now you can go there and download really big seismic surveys free of charge. The data is public after 10 years, I think, in Australia. And so that's what we did. We got the data from there for the seismic. Via ConocoPhillips, they helped us getting it and formatting it, stuff like that. And then the well data set here in Norway, we have the big advantage that all the well logs are public after 2 years. So the gamma ray neutron density, the basic composite log suite of all the wells in Norway is public 2 years after they have been drilled in a sort of a good state, but not a perfectly QC'd state. But of course, we wanted to have lithology interpretation, and that, of course, is not public. So in Norway, what we publish is the log data, but not the interpreted data, because the interpreted data, and that's correct, is where the competitive advantage of the companies is sitting. So we needed to create quite a lot of lithology interpretation. So we had to get quite a bit of funding, so about $46,000 in order to create lithology data, run this pay Matt Hall here to help us with the legal parts. And then we also needed a scoring platform, some online place where people can submit their models and get a return of the score and see, like, okay, this is how good my model performed. And here we teamed up with this company called Xeek. That's a Shell spin-off. They were very friendly and very helpful, but they were a little bit hampered by working with Shell, which you can imagine is a huge legal entity. So it was touch and go whether we could make it work. So in the end, what we did for the money that we invested, we went to a company here in Norway. You may remember the oil price was very low last year, so there were quite a few people didn't have a lot to do. So ExploCrowd is a service company, shall say, here in Norway, and we gave them all the logs that we had for the wells. You can see them here, and we gave them the composite logs and the cuttings descriptions, and said, please make us a very consistent lithology interpretation for these logs. And here's two important things, interpretation and consistent. We know that lithology will always be an interpretation, but we were hoping by going to one vendor, we get a consistent interpretation, because that's, in the end of the day, what a machine needs to work against. At the same time, we also got contacted by this company here from Vietnam called I2G. They're having a really nice piece of software that does machine learning with well logs. It's all in the cloud, and they just called me one evening and said, hey, Peter, we see you have this competition here. We would like to help you. How can we help you? And I said, well, do me some lithology logs. And they said, okay, no problem. So 2 weeks later, they gave us another 14 interpreted wells. And in return, they became a sponsor of the competition, and they offer free licenses, I think, still to that software platform where you can train with this data. You can drop down different machine learning models and see what it does. We also, so we asked them to give us a lithology and a confidence interpretation. So I need to skip to the next log here. No, so I need a confidence and a lithology interpretation. So when you're really confident, oh, here you see it, sorry. Yeah. So, I was hoping that by having a confidence of the interpretation, you can build a much better machine learning model. And so we asked the interpreters for the lithology to say, like, hey, if the cuttings are shale, the gamma ray is high, the density reads high, and you have the separation here, it's a shale, confidence 1. But then you have these things like tuffs here, right? In Norway, we have this period in the Eocene where you had a lot of volcanoes exploding, and you have this sort of interlayered volcanic tuff and shale layer that it's sort of difficult for the logs to pick. Is it actually shale or is it a tuff? And so here the confidence is often degraded. Or here, for example, you see down here, there we have a clean limestone, and then it gets a bit more marly here. And so they degraded the confidence, saying, well, you know, maybe it's not quite entirely. Sort of, where do you pull that boundary between a marl and a limestone? So then we talk about interpretation. And this is what, you know, everybody, I hope many of you work with well logs on a day-to-day basis. You will learn that yourself, is that if we focus here on the left well, we have the forced lithology, and here on the right side, we have the ConocoPhillips internal in-house interpretation for one of these wells. And it's becoming immediately apparent that the people from X-Prograde thought that this is quite a bit more shaly than the ConocoPhillips interpreter. And that's okay. There are semantics. It's not entirely fixed and clear, left or right. You know, where do you put the interpretation? Then here on the right-hand side, the guys from X-Prograde are saying that's a sandstone. Conoco is saying it's a sandstone. But then here we're widely apart. So they're saying this is a sandstone, and the ConocoPhillips petrophysicist that says it's a limestone. And that's really interesting, is because there you obviously need to go back to the sort of hard data, the completion log, the cuttings, whatever you can find. Look at your logs one more time properly. I'd say, like, looking at the separation here of the density neutron, I'd argue that the force interpretation here is actually better than the ConocoPhillips interpretation. And that's okay, because maybe ConocoPhillips actually wasn't interested up here. Maybe our reservoir target is down there, and so that's where we focused on, you know. And so what becomes apparent is lithology will always be an interpretation. And what we notice here is that, you know, this is not your typical machine learning problem where you ask Google to show me the cat and the dog on the image. We don't have this sort of hard classes. They're sort of between a shaly sand and a sandy shale and a silt. There are gradational cutoffs, and it's very hard to pick them consistent and you know, consistently throughout a large data set, given that you're also having wells that are drilled in the last 30, 40 years, and the well log measurements have improved and changed. So this is just a caveat about this lithology data set. If you manage to get a chance to explore with it, you will find a couple of funny things, and I'll show you some of them. Then we here with the, sorry, I just have to take a sip of water. So then with the seismic data, some of you may have seen that there's lots of vendors out there that are currently selling you machine learning fault detection algorithms for seismic, and we do this in-house in ConocoPhillips. We have quite a good one. And I have to say that some of this machine learning for fault detection is just absolutely fantastic, miraculous. And so we wanted to see how good is the industry at the moment. So we provided people with a training data set and a blind data set that's spatially very closely located in the same basin. But it's very different from the data sets you see flying around on LinkedIn, is because you see the faults are sort of easy enough to pick for a good geologist or any sort of geologist. But the machine will really struggle because you don't get the sort of discrete continuities. You see it here as well, like, you know, okay, do I put a fault in there or do I put a fault in here? Sort of not the easiest data set, and that was entirely intentional. We wanted to test the water on difficult data set. So in addition to this data set, we provided a synthetics data set from Equinor here that is model-based. So you get the acoustic impedance here, and you get the earth model, and a sort of also a synthetic data set from Schlumberger. And you know, what I found amazing when we went to Equinor and asked them, would you be able to give us a synthetic training data set to find faults? They said, yes, we're going to try. And Schlumberger did the same at the same time. And you know, here you really can see how industry has moved on. If you would have gone to Schlumberger or Equinor 5 years ago and would have said, can you give me some of your proprietary data? I'm running a competition and want to find out who's the best here. They would have said no. And so what we've seen in this competition is that oil companies are increasingly opening up through this sort of more public interaction on their data. And so, yeah, this is what I really want to say here. So anyway, the people had 3 months to learn how to build these models and then 12 hours to return their blind cube here. So who participated in these competitions? And I still haven't fixed this, it's dreadful. So we had a participation from the entire world. That's great. We had quite a few people from Brazil, really slow, and I terribly here for, sorry, dear South Americans, I'm a big fan of South America, so I moved them over to Chile and to Peru, maybe up here. The Brazilians were really sitting up here and in Rio. We had people from Italy. We had very few people from Norway. That was really disappointing. Hardly any students from Norway. A couple of people from Equinor, a couple of people China, India, some person who was stuck in Central Australia because of COVID. Quite a contingent from Indonesia. So word by mouth, this went around the entire world by LinkedIn and by friends saying, hey, there's a competition, you know, are you interested? We had Olawale here from Nigeria as the African contingent. So we had 400 teams and maybe 1,000 people who participated in this. And that's, you know, when you think about that first competition where you had 40 teams, in only 5 years, we went to, say, 400 teams, right? So you can see that there's an increasing skill base of geoscientists who learns how to do machine learning and actually is very interested in this. And luckily, I also see a lot of great guys coming out of the universities with skills like that at the moment. So here we have the lithology. So people were getting the blind data set or the public data set, and they were running their codes on the public data set and then tested it against the test data set. Then they saw which wells they were, but they didn't know the lithology, and then they could yeah. So in here you see that sort of score against the blind data set. That's the data set that they didn't even know that was on that platform. They didn't know where the wells were, what logs were there. So that you put your model in there, it's like a little bit like a one-arm bandit machine, you know, you put your model, your coin in there, rattle the key, and so you get a score back, right? And what you can generally see is that the scores improve over time. People experiment, get off track and come back here, but really the scores were very, very close in the end. So, you know, so you have a divergence of thought in the beginning, and as people try out different methods, you actually see that they're coming very, very close here. So why is this a sort of a different data set here? That, you know, this was not your beautiful, perfect data set. Is we used realistic well data. We did clean up the really bad errors in the data set, like the caliper's wrong or the hole size is wrong like that. But we didn't sort of focus only on intervals where you had all the logs. That was intentional, such that people build ensembled models that work with where you only have 2 well logs or 5 well logs, etc. You also see that, of course, the class imbalance is a huge problem in machine learning. So most of what we have here in Norway is shale. I don't know how it is in Ecuador. I guess you're sitting pretty much, same there. Then you have quite a lot of sandstone because it's the key target. We go through the chalk, which is limestone, etc. And then you get these sort of rare classes. Somebody drills a well really deep into the basement and gets a couple of shots here. I just put my, I can't do that. So you have we supplied realistic well data. We have a highly imbalanced data set. And then we thought we were clever here, and we make a sort of a scoring matrix that is geologically motivated. So we got to a couple of petrophysicists and asked them, so if I label a sandstone and my tool predicts a dolomite, how much penalty should I give that model for that prediction there? And we agreed on a score of 1 to 5 and said that's a pretty poor prediction, so 3.75. If you label a sandstone and predict a sandstone, obviously you don't get any bad score. If you label a sandstone and predict a sort of sandstone shale mixture, you get a score of -2. So what we often saw in competitions or in sort of machine learning models, that all answers are equally wrong or equally right, and we wanted to make sure that the contestants put some geological thinking in their machine learning models. So this was our geological scoring matrix that was used to rank the results from the models. So how did it go in the end? So we had 329 teams who signed up for that, 148 submitted results, and in the end it became very close here. So you see the final leaderboard score was the winning 3 teams: Olavale Ibrahim, Gia from Brazil, Ika from Brazil as well, and then the guys from Statoil. I think these were the Italians, and a couple of lone wolves here. What's also really interesting is that how their leaderboard ranks. So on that test data set, like Olavale was not so good on the test data set, but on that blind data set, he came out first because he built a model that was really generalized, that really works with a lot of different lithologies. Yeah. If you look in terms of right and wrong prediction, like how, they are extremely close. Like, Olavale had 80% right, the next ones had 79.6, 79.9. And here you actually do see, interestingly enough, that the guys here have a better score, 79.9, but they were only ranked 3rd because we applied that geological scoring matrix, right? So they got more bad predictions, like say predicting a dolomite for sandstone or the other way around. So that's why the right one matrix here is off. So, and here I'm a little bit in weak ground. I'm not a coder myself. So Peter Auersand is sort of the smart guy who checked all these codes and did all of that. But so what was really working here? Interestingly enough, XGBoost was the winning algorithm for the top 3 recipes. And 5 years ago, that was also the top winning algorithm. So, we thought that somebody comes up with some really clever, deep NLP-based BERT, what have you not, and no, simple gradient boosting. Stratified cross-fault validation. In the pre-processing, you saw different approaches amongst different teams, but most people were dropping really rare curves. People were imputing missing intervals. Some of them, like Olavale, who won it, he just set, I think, all the, I'm not entirely sure if he did. Some of them who had high scores set imputed the missing curves with a straight value, like 9999. Some of them tried to be really clever and predict the log from other logs first, so you get a full log suit. Basic set score normalization. Then on the augmentation, people were experimenting with, taking gradients of logs, like getting trend-based and converting that to create additional features, mean, max, min. So there was a bit of augmentation going on, but not as much as I was thinking initially would be the case. So then we look at how good these models were here in terms of a confusion matrix. I just explained it roughly, quickly how it works. So here, if you predict sandstone and it's labeled as sandstone, so this in 78% of the cases here, when you predict the sandstone and it's labeled as sandstone, it's correct. But in 12% of the cases, it's labeled as a sandstone and it was predicted as a sandstone shale. Let's go here. We labeled as a tuff, and in 21% of the cases, it was predicted as a shale here in that first model. If you squint with your eyes across that, you can see that most of the models are right, but a lot of people are struggling exactly with these tuffs here, like and the coals and what else. Yeah, so there's quite a lot of mislabeling, and then we have quite a bit of confusion around sandstones, sandstone shales, and that's not surprising, as we said before, because where do you put that boundary? Like, you know, we can expect that in that label data set that we make, there are errors in there. Maybe there are some shifts in these sort of hard cutoffs, right? What else did I want to say here? If you look at just the confusion matrix here, I'd say actually that the Equinor model here came out really well. It's sort of geologically a very nice model, but they had a couple of outliers that cost them a lot of points, like you know, labeled as a dolomite, predicting as an anhydrite. You go like, wow, come on, that you can nearly fix without machine learning, right? Okay. So then we look at sort of logs, and that's easier for me to talk about because I'm a geologist. So what you see here at the left is the label, and then the confidence of the label, then the prediction of the first, second, and third ranked model, and then in red where it's wrong, that model. And if you just lean back and look at that, you go like, Jesus Christ, there's a lot of red here. So there's a lot of wrong here, right? And for me, it was even worse, because when I did this the first time in Petrel, I had the score the other way around, so it was even more red than it's now. But so, and then you go look at this a little bit more closely, and you go like, wow, you know, okay, so let's look at this a little bit more closely. So here we're having a sandy shale, and all models are predicting a shale. Okay, it's wrong, but you know, could I, as a geologist, live with this being classified as a shale? Most likely I could, right? Same here, like, you know, where exactly do you go from, I think this is pure chalk, into a marl, and then back to a limestone here? Is this a marl or is this a shale? So it's this cutoff thing that we talked about. Let's look at this well here. There, what it appears to me is that all the models struggle with these sort of cemented intervals. So here the interpreters put a cemented limestone in there, and the models are not picking this readily up. And you can ask yourself, like, you know, okay, we looked at the cuttings. We have the luxury of having cuttings images here in Norway. And yes, it looked cemented, but then petrophysically, you know, do you actually pick this up? Is the interesting question. Here we have a salt bed. It's correctly picked up in 2 models, and that third model puts it into a limestone, which they get quite a bad score for. So have a look at another one. Here's an interesting example. This is our label. We said it's a limestone, and everybody said, all the models say it's a sandstone. So there's quite a few of these coincidences there, and then I thought like, that's so bizarre. So let's go back and check, and I went back and looked at the cuttings images, and there's even a core here. It turns out that our label was wrong. It is indeed a conglomerate, and don't ask me why they put it into a limestone, but you know, we are humans, we make mistakes. But the good thing is that you see the power of machine learning. So if I now in-house do my lithology prediction, I just run 5 of these models, and where they all disagree with my label, that's a really good prompt as a geologist to go back and say, well, you know, none of the machine learning models say that this is a limestone. Let me have a look. Could there be a limestone? And just from a sort of general point of view, I want to make about machine learning. This is really where I see the power, is that the machine does a lot of the grunt work, and it allows the geologists to spend more time on these sort of tricky instances, finding inconsistencies in the database, discovering a little sandstone that people didn't see before, thinking about the impact. So that's really the power of it. And the other thing that was surprising here, all of the models were really poor in picking up these thin beds here, like this. You see this density and neutron excursion towards the right, clearly a sort of maybe a dolomitic or a limestone streak there. And you go like, come on, that you can nearly solve without machine learning. But here we have that class imbalance problem again, right? So because we don't have a lot of these limestones, if you get this wrong, you're not hurt very hard by it in the machine learning model. And that's something to think about in a future competition. I would do this different. I would sort of not only score the geology, but I would also punish for class imbalance. But you have to be careful when you do this, because then people find an exploit to exploit your model, and you have this, the adversary of the adversary is the adversary of the adversary. So we don't want to go there. Okay, here's a bit more geology, just selecting a couple of random wells, and this looks a bit better, I find. So here we have the handcrafted interpretation. So that's the interpretation, cost about, what did we pay, about maybe $2,000 per well or something. No, not so much. Let me see, 2,000. Yeah, $200-300 per well we paid for the interpretation of this. And this is what a machine does. And you know, as a geologist, I could live with this, to be honest. I mean, unless you're sort of determining the value of an oil field, you'd be maybe a bit more concerned. But for regional interpretation, this is just good enough. Look at this well here. It's the typical thin beds that are being gotten wrong. Question is if they're actually sands or if they're limestones. One would have to go back and look at it carefully. What do we get here wrong here? It's a marl versus a shaly sand. Yeah, but on general, you know, another couple of wells, I think this is not too bad. I'd be interested to hear your opinions. Obviously, it all depends how you work with this, what you're going to use the data for. And so we had this competition, and I just wanted to mention John's name here. Is we had this competition, and there was the high score, and Olawale Ibrahim from Nigeria won this, and we had a symposium about this, and it was really nice. Here, John Massa Panta Pozo, I guess some of you know him. He's from Ecuador. He's working with Equinor on this data, and he managed to improve the score that Olawale came up by quite a few points, by doing sort of a clever machine learning model as part of his master's thesis. And I think this is a really nice example where what we wanted to achieve is that students from all over the world can work with this data, come up with their ideas, and popularize it back and share it maybe back to the industry like John did with us. And so now I'm running John's model on my wells and see if it's better. So if you want to look at his presentation here, it's a really nice one. You just take a shot with your phone here. How did it go with the well competition? Didn't go well at all. So that's also something, you know, you win some, you lose some. I think the seismic competition. The well competition went really well, but the seismic competition, so this is the models that were submitted back here, and that's the in-house ConocoPhillips model. And what we noticed is that Sparvion is a university group from Indonesia. I think they did a good job in finding sort of the major faults, but obviously it's not sort of really representative. The other oil companies that submitted their models are good here in the overburden, but they struggle really with this long fault down there. ConocoPhillips model is actually quite good by comparison. And, you know, I have to be honest here, I don't think we gotten a representative sample back. And there's also a learning in here is that there's still a lot of intellectual property with this machine learning and faults on seismic. Some companies are still being built around that. Some companies sell this at incredible prices to oil companies, some a lot cheaper. So I guess we tried to test something where people weren't willing to give up their intellectual property, even though they didn't have to submit any codes or they didn't tell us exactly how to do it. But it didn't work. So let's hope like next time it will be better. So the challenges and what have we learned? So remember, the true legacy of this competition is really the data set. So, you know, I'm really proud that we as a group managed to get 118 wells out there to the public with decent lithology interpretation, completely public. You can pull it down from Zenodo. and all you need to do is put a citation towards it. You can use it for whatever you want, and you can use it inside your company. You can publish it, what have you not. The only thing you're not allowed to do is sell it. That would be unfair. And you know, the other thing that we learned, interpreted subsurface data is and will always be tricky. We don't have the ground truth. We could maybe crowdsource the ground truth. So I could ask all of you to provide me with a lithology interpretation, and maybe somewhere in between there's the truth. We can get the ground truth to a degree from cuttings, but not entirely, because cuttings have a different sample interval. They're often mixed, and so we wanted to keep the data raw. And we you know, I talked about like class imbalances, and we were thinking about all sorts of clever ways of enforcing geological thought in there, but we were really afraid of doing so, and we didn't in the end, because what we realize is that somebody will always exploit your exploit if you do that. So you can't think of all the eventuality of all these clever people out there. We wanted to spend the money on the data and not on the prices, and create a lasting value for the community. Yeah, so this is what we really did. Open high quality data is hard to come by in geoscience. Here's a nice one for you guys now. And we think that having these open data sets is really democratizing subsurface data. So students, independents, can test their idea and compete on an equal footing. I mean, just the fact that I'm talking to all of you in Ecuador, which is fantastic, you know, shows that we are democratizing this knowledge. You can pick this up and you can become better than I am. And that is really what we're trying to achieve. Yeah, so the data set is here. Because I guess quite a few of you are students. So you know, I just want to mention a couple of things of where do I see the geoscientists in the future. So I think the key skills here that we need to pick up, in addition to be a geologist or geophysicist, is or a reservoir engineer. We need to pick up data analyst skills. There's no doubt about that. Statistical data analysis. You need to understand what these machine learning do, but you also need to understand the basics of data analysis, and you need to be critical, open, right? That's always the key. But you know, a very solid foundation of geoscience first principles will always be needed, right? The machine's not going to solve the problem. The machine is helping you to identify the problem, and you will be there with your geological knowledge, with your geophysical engineering knowledge, and you will be taking that problem and solving it in a creative way. And for that, it's absolutely mandatory that we need good geologists skills, you know. Machine learning doesn't solve creativity. It doesn't sort of make the cool connection between the field in Chile and the one in Ecuador and the one in Norway, and you realize, look, there's this process going on. At least it doesn't do that at the moment. So, you know, curiosity is king, will always be. You know, you have to have this internal drive of investigating your data, of having the fascination for the subsurface, solving these sort of riddles, now, what was that famous Sherlock Holmes style investigation? I always think, you know, reading bits and bobs and trying to understand what's really going on there. I think it's important that we get good at Python. I'm terrible at it. I had to learn Fortran 95 at school. I hope that nobody of you will ever have to do that. But you need to know what you want to focus on, you know. I sort of, you can become a full-out coder, or you can become a geoscientist who can do little bits and bobs. But when it gets complicated, you really want to sit down with a programmer or with a data engineer and instill your ideas into that code. It's important that we build networks outside the oil and gas industry. I think that, you know, the oil and gas is going to come to an end sooner or later. But this sort of skills of data analysis, creativity, curiosity will stay with you forever. It's a sort of a core skill. And remember, openness fosters openness, right? If you can share your data, share your ideas. My experience is that when you do that, more often than not, you get more back than what you've given away. That's sort of my philosophy to life. But yeah, that's really, so this is, I think, my last slide here. So I'm welcoming any sort of questions. Be critical. Don't ask me anything difficult about machine learning because I'm useless at it. But anything else, I'm more than happy to talk to you guys.
Thanks, Peter. Very interesting presentation. We have a couple of questions in the chat. Okay. And I'd like to mention that we have taken some ideas from the fourth challenge of the last year. And I think, yeah, we are organizing a machine learning challenge for the first machine learning challenge for oil and gas in Ecuador. So we have learned and we have taken a lot of ideas from this challenge. So I just want to mention that this is the kind of initiatives that the SPE is trying to replicate. So we are going to talk about later in the next conferences. So the first question that I have is pretty much related with the fourth challenge about the well log prediction, the lithology prediction. It says it's from Hugo Vasquez, and he says, congratulations for your presentation. My question is, if you notice the distribution of the formation and group columns for the well log dataset, you may see that there are formations repeated in more than one group. Could it be a cause for noise when you train the model? Would you recommend to drop those columns if that is true?
So, okay, first of all, there you have the problem with a real data set. So these wells have been generated over the last 30 years, and of course, the same formation shouldn't occur in different groups. So there must be an error there. So you have two ways of addressing that. You can look upon it statistically and say, if that formation occurs mainly in that group, then it belongs to that group, and I cancel it for the rest of it. That's most likely what I would have done, or I would have gone and actually fixed it because I know the stratigraphy here. The other thing is, what we've seen is when people do feature importance like Shapley and stuff like that on what you see in all the models, or in many of the models, is that formation and location are really important for getting for the prediction of the lithology, and that's not surprising, right? So if you're in the chalk, the model will learn that in the chalk formation there's a lot of chalk, so you're better off putting your limestone looking signature into a chalk than into a limestone. So I hope that clarifies that. So I wouldn't drop the column entirely. I don't think that's the right thing. I'd taken a statistical approach to find out where the formation really belongs, maybe hand edit another one, to do it like that. Yeah. Okay.
Nice. Yeah, the next question is from Angeles Remache. She says, excellent presentation, Peter. My question is there any model misinterpretation when you encode the output phases lithologies with ordinal numbers, like the results for this contest? Supposing that that kind of encoding for categorical variables may be interpreted with some hierarchy?
Oh, Jesus Christ. Hey, I'm not sure I entirely understand the questions. Okay, so let's take this apart here. So, Angeles, if you're here, you can also turn up your microphone and explain it to a normal person.
What I understand from here is that I understand that Angeles is asking about the results of the challenge. And I think that when you encode the labels of the lithologies, yeah, you assign like numbers from 0 to 11, right?
Yeah.
So she's asking if there is any misinterpretation in the model, because when you encode ordinal numbers, you implicitly are giving some idea of hierarchy. When you say 1, 2, 3, 4.
No. Okay, now I get it. Thank you for explaining, Felix. So you're good at this stuff. No, that shouldn't be. No, I mean, as long as you. No, I don't think that should happen. To be honest, not from my knowledge of tree-based models. They don't really care about that. Whether you can encode it A, B, C, D or America, China, shouldn't make a difference. But, if somebody has a different opinion, please let me know. But from my experience, it shouldn't make a difference. Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell Angeles to give us a better idea. Okay, so I have another question from Paul Quesada. He says for data imbalance of classes like halides, dolomites, or tuff, do you recommend hyperparameter tuning instead of oversampling, or which method do you think would be better to be applied in the forced dataset?
You know what I would do if I would do it myself? I would maybe use a mixed approach between machine learning and traditional petrophysics. So some things like these sort of rare classes like halides and dolomites, you can nearly hard code because you know that the density has to be higher than that, the porosity not lower than that, the gamma ray like this. And so maybe take those ones out, and then I would, where exactly I would lean towards oversampling, to be honest, rather than hyperparametric tuning, but it's worthwhile an experiment. Just try it out. That's the curiosity part of it. I can't give you the answer here. But there was, if you go through these videos that we had from this symposium, I think Felix will send you a link to these and you can share it afterwards. There were some really nice presentations by, I think John Massapanta and also the guys from Brazil, the ICA team. They did a lot of petrophysical thinking in their logs, whereby they edited curves, they looked for outliers, they tried to put, and so they took care of some of what you're mentioning here with this class imbalance. Okay, nice. Next one.
Next one is from Mario Santiago Duque. Hello, Paul. In your experience, what kind of machine learning techniques best fits to infer the impedances from seismic data?
Oh, hold on a second. Now I jumped the whole question here. Where are you? What machine best fits the impedances to infer the? So what we see. So I mean, if you say like inversion algorithms, it's encoder-decoder networks that typically work. So invariants of that, right? So you encode seismic and decode towards a well log, and then you invert for that. I've seen quite a few. I mean, if you go to was it the SEG this year in San Antonio? No, it must have been fully online. I don't know. There's quite a few papers there. Obviously, you can't just infer impedance without having training data, right? So you need well logs to train against. But yeah, encoder-decoder networks of various forms and shapes seems to be the state of the art. But I'm not so deep into that, I have to admit, Mario. So, but as I say, the SEG, I think there was some online SEG this year. There were quite a few papers there on that topic, so have a look there.
Okay, yeah. Nice. Another question from Julio Murillo. He says, great presentation, Peter. Question, based on the outcome force competition, what do you think is still left to do or try regarding to machine learning algorithms for lithology prediction?
Yeah, it's a good question, Julio, because, you know, so nobody really got above the 80% score, right? And you have to ask yourself, is it actually possible to get above the 80% score? Or is the data too uncertain that you're ever going to get across that? So John Massapanta here, he got a little bit higher, but also not significantly above the 80%. What I think is still left is, what I was surprised, let's put it that way, when I looked at many of the models, is a lot of the models seem to be simple or XGBoost, where you go across all your features with very little vertical augmentation. So you take the gamma ray neutron density and you predict the lithology at one sample depth. And when you think about how a petrophysicist or you and me look at a well log is very different. I look at a trend, I look at the formation above, I look at the formation below, and then I decide what this is. And so I think if, you know, personally, I thought that building good augmentation features like that learn geological trends, or we were also thinking about coding which formation is above which formation, or which, you know, does a sandstone, when you think about now the term slips me, if you analyze like what typically follows on top of a sandstone, or what is typically below a sandstone or above a sandstone, this sort of sequence thinking that a human is doing, it's a question if that would help if one would try to put this into the machine learning model. That's, if I would have a student, that's what I would tell him to do. But obviously you have to try it yourself. So yeah. Does that answer the question, Julio? Hope so. If not, you just ask again.
Julio was one of the Ecuadorians who participated in the fourth challenge, so I think that's why he asked that question. Okay. Peter, so after the questions, Peter, I think we don't have any more questions. Yeah, so in representation of the SPE Ecuador section, I want to thank you, Peter, for your presentation. I hope by means of this talk, many people from Ecuador can join the next competition. And we're glad to socialize this kind of initiatives in our country. And we hope that we can have the opportunity to do this again with you in some other event. Thank you very much, and hope you have enjoyed this conference too. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice afternoon, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care, Peter.
Bye.
Dear attendees, this is the end of the journey for today. I hope you have enjoyed these presentations. Thank you for joining us today, and we will be waiting for you in the next talks of tomorrow. Thank you so much for attending these presentations. Take care.